Afternoon, everyone. My name is Kyle Marks. I'm Associate Dean for National Scholarships, and with me today is Dr. Lori Stoff, our Assistant Director. And today we're going to be talking about strategies for cultivating strong letters of recommendation. This is, I think, an undervalued part of the fellowships application process from a student's perspective. I think leading up to university, a lot of times a letter of recommendation is a checkbox on an application. Either it's done or it's not done. Wherein the fellowships application process, these are incredibly important. So, as you know, the first part of our Spring 25 Fellowships Friday series, we thought this would be a good starting point because it's one that needs a little bit more lead time. So, for those of you that are looking forward to grad school applications or professional school applications or fellowships for fall deadlines, it's never too early to start thinking about letters of recommendation. So, in terms of what you should remember by the end of this presentation, you must, I think, appreciate how important letters of recommendation are to the fellowships application process. They don't just appear like mushrooms overnight, right? They can be cultivated by you and your relationship management with faculty and staff and other professionals. But yeah, sorry, I'll just go ahead and keep this one. Just for context, some of you might be new to this conversation in terms of, I was just saying fellowships and what we meant by national scholarships, but the N and the S in ONSA talks about national scholarships, which are broad, nationally available awards that are offered to students, not just at ASU, but students throughout the country and now even across the world. So all of these are external awards, which means they're very large applicant pools and therefore very competitive. They are all mission driven. So they all were created by a federal agency or a philanthropic organization or a federal or a foreign government to achieve a specific purpose. So our strategy in applying for these types of awards, given that they are very competitive, is to really focus in on what the mission of this program is and to make sure that you're a good fit for it, but also that your application is pitched towards those requirements. Dr. Stoff?
So you might be wondering what it is that we do in the Office of National Scholarship Advisement, and we are here to serve you, and we do that in a number of different ways. We do one-on-one advising as well as small group advising. So for awards that you're seeking and you want help at any stage of the application process, from just strategizing ways to approach it all the way through reviewing application essays and getting all of the materials in that you need, we are here to help you with that process. We do that also through writing workshops, give you feedback on those essays. If there is an interview component to those awards, we will absolutely work with you to prepare you. We will set up mock interviews where we'll gently grill you and make sure that you're ready for those interviews. We will help you with getting faculty mentors to help you, and with committees that are here to serve the purpose of getting endorsements from the university and nominations. There are certain awards that do require those, so that is what we are here to help you with.
So letters of recommendation are, as I mentioned at the outset, a huge factor in fellowships. They often, from my opinion, matter as much as the material that you provide for the application. In addition to working on this side of things, I and several of the members of ONSA have served on reading committees at the national level for several awards. And I can tell you, I look deeply into those letters when I'm reviewing an application to see, okay, fine, this applicant put on a good face, they put on a good show about their own knowledge, skills, and abilities, but what do people at my level have to say about them? And a lot of times that's what letters of recommendation are. They are a message peer-to-peer from an established academic professional to a colleague. Listen, we're on the same level, we are peers, we respect one another, but here's honestly what I think of this student. So there's a lot of credibility involved in this here. I think about recommendation letters as extending the application as opposed to just confirming it. So we think about what can the recommendation letters say about you that you can't say about yourself. This is one of the primary reasons when applicants are asked to write their own letters of recommendation, we strongly discourage that practice. You cannot extend your own application because all you can do is talk about what you know. Um, and so those types of letters are often thin, they're not terribly useful, and we really rely on the expertise of faculty, experienced staff, other professionals to put you in a larger context and to explain why your work is so fabulous or why your research is amazing in the context of maybe something I'm not familiar with as a reader. And so we want those letters to provide good firsthand evidence. Like, I saw them do this. I was there when they did this. This is how they behave within the context of their peers, right? So all of those things are important in a good letter of recommendation, which is exactly why we rely on them so much in a successful application.
So you may be wondering whom to ask in terms of getting a letter of recommendation that's going to be strong and successful. And sometimes students really struggle with this, but the things that you want to keep in mind are that the person who is doing the recommendation should be someone who knows you very well. So this means not necessarily the person who is the most famous that you took a class with 500 other people who never got to know you at all and couldn't pick you out of a crowd. That is not the person to ask. It's someone who can speak about you both in an academic sense, but also in a personal way, who knows who you are, what makes you tick. And that also is what is relevant to the context. So a lot of awards really want to know more broadly where you fit in sort of the ecosystem, not just academically that you're a great student and you write strong papers, but what are the things that make you the great person that you are. So that means they do need to know quite a bit about you. They have to have relevant data to share with you. And they also need to be credible to the reviewer. And so we'll talk a little bit more about what this means, but that often means somebody who is in a supervisory position or has some kind of title. Sometimes that is more or less important depending on the award. But as we will talk about further, is not somebody who's just your friend or somebody who you casually know.
That was a great question about, how does this work with online students? And that's something we're going to discuss towards the end, because I think it's an important discussion to have given ASU's commitment, to accessible education, right? So in terms of what a strong letter, what goes into a strong letter of recommendation, we look for readers. As a reader, I look for strong, concrete details or examples, right? If we make broad claims with a lot of superlatives, they're the most amazing, they're the best, they're the smartest, funniest, whatever. It's hard to, just as you've learned when writing papers in your classes, claims without evidence aren't terribly persuasive, right? And so we need to see some examples that support the claims that they're making. We hope that they write with enthusiasm or interest. And so as you're negotiating these letters, as you're managing that relationships, you should be able to gauge how relatively enthusiastic they seem to be about doing this. And we'll talk a little bit about strategies for gauging that and making sure that they are enthusiastic about it. One of the best ways to gauge it is if they approach you. A lot of students have gotten this to, at the end of a class or at the end of a research experience, a mentor says, hey, listen, if you ever need a letter of recommendation, let me know. That is a good sign. That doesn't happen all the time, right? And the letter should also speak directly to the context of the fellowship. Now, we do understand, we're also going to be speaking about our own perspectives as faculty members who write a lot of letters of recommendation. You write a lot of letters in a year, right? That's part of the job of being a faculty member or an administrator, is that you are asked to write a lot of letters of recommendation. It's not always that easy to accommodate and make them specific to all these different awards. But I do think it's important. When I get a letter that says I recommend X student for this award, I can tell it's just been sort of recycled, right? And I know that most letters are recycled, but it wouldn't take that long to just do a hunt, a search and replace for this. Not necessarily your job to tell recommenders to do all of this, right? For that reason, we actually have memoranda of guidance. So these are actual letters from me, from the office, that you can give to the people you invite to write your letters of recommendation that provide specific guidance on specific awards to say, okay, this is what makes for a good Marshall Scholarship letter. This is what makes for a good Fulbright letter versus what makes a good Goldwater letter. It provides them all the information we need. And I worry sometimes that students don't avail themselves of that resource enough. We could send it to your faculty members for you, but on the other hand, it's also your application. So I think it's a great resource to help the readers. If they are enthusiastic, they will appreciate that guidance.
So when you're seeking to obtain an academic reference, you do want to make sure that the people you're asking are university level faculty members. So that usually means not high school teachers, unless it's somebody that has taught you very recently. So some of the awards that we advise on are open to first year and second year students who may not have a lot of contact hours yet with university level faculty members. In that case, sometimes it's okay to have a high school member, or a high school faculty member. But in general, what you're really looking for is somebody at the university level, somebody who's recently taught you. So not somebody, if you're a senior that you had in a class with when you were a first year student and may not remember you. If that's the only person you can really think of, then I highly recommend that you contact that person, set up a meeting with them, and spend some time updating them on what you've been doing in the time between when you were in their class and then when you're asking for the letter. Some awards do prefer folks who have higher ranks. So we're talking about associate or full professor. This is not always the case. And in many cases, that it's much preferable to get the person who knows you best rather than the person who has a higher rank. But again, there are certain awards, and we will help to advise you on which ones those are. Really best not to ask graduate students or postdocs. They will not have the same kind of credibility that a faculty member will have. So again, and sometimes that's difficult if you're a first or second year student and you have a lot of labs or discussion sections that are only run by graduate students. So we're here to help you find the folks that are most suitable for writing these kinds of letters.
So one of the important distinctions to make when you're getting your stuff together, getting ready to apply, we look at the number of references required, and then we look at if there's any expectations of academic versus non-academic references. So academic references would mean people who have taught you and instructed you in a class or supervised your research, right, in a formal setting, right? So that's how we distinguish between the two. Even though they might be working at the university, it still might be a non-academic reference because the interaction wasn't academic. Maybe it had to do with extracurriculars or volunteer experience, right? But if you're allowed non-academic references, it could be, people of professional standing. They supervise you maybe in a volunteer experience at work, in some other capacity. Internship supervisors, faculty advisors for student orgs, community service experiences, all great options for non-academic references. And like I said, in some cases, depends on the award, which, for instance, Goldwater is trying to evaluate the likelihood that this student will go on into a research PhD and have an impactful research career. So in that case, they're looking for purely academic references, as opposed to, say, Truman Scholarship, which is looking for people who want to pursue a career in government or public service. It's quite likely that those people have been more engaged in community service and academic research.
So as I alluded to earlier, it's really not a good idea to ask a high school teacher unless it's somebody who, again, has taught you very, very recently. Please do not ask a peer, a family member, a friend, again, someone you have a casual relationship with. Even if that family member is a senator or a congressperson, still not a good idea. Although you might think, oh, that'll sound really good that this person who's very well placed in the government is writing for me. If they're a relative, that will actually count against you. That is not a good idea. And please do not write it yourself. Not only is this unethical, but as Dr. Mox indicated earlier, it will not give the depth and the context that's necessary to have a really good letter of recommendation.
And to add a little bit of nuance to that, it comes up all the time. And sometimes we have to unpack that request a little bit. Students will come to us and say, oh, my professor asked me to write the letter for them. And we'll deconstruct the conversation a little bit. And what we realize is maybe your professor was asking, hey, could you write an outline for me so I can understand, the parameters of this award or how your experiences map in there, right? I don't think there's anything wrong with that to give them a rough outline to say, well, this, I think you could really emphasize these things here. Here's my personal statement, here's my CV. Um, just sitting down to write it verbatim yourself and having them sign it, that's kind of a thing we do in the Army, but it doesn't work so well, here, because the audiences are looking for more depth. But so if that happens to you and you're not really sure how to proceed, definitely talk to us, and we can figure out how to negotiate that.
Yeah, and I will say, like, when students ask me for letters of recommendation, I do always ask them for a list of bullet points of things related directly to the award that they're applying for that they would like me to emphasize, along with a CV or a resume and a transcript so that I can sort of counter reference the things that they've done against the things that they're being asked to demonstrate. That's not the same thing as writing the letter yourself and then just
Mm,
asking them to sign. That's just giving the recommender the additional context, the additional information that they need to write that strong letter.
yeah. True story. When I was coming out of undergrad and I was applying for my master's degree, was actually a Master of Fine Arts in creative writing. Um, so I was looking for faculty members who could speak to this, and I had, two creative writing faculty members and one literature professor. And I wrote him and I explained because it was a little bit off topic, why I thought he would be such a great recommender. I talked about which classes I had taken with him, reminded him of the papers that I had written, and talked a little bit about my behavior in class. As an undergraduate, I was a bit more of a sit back and listen and then come in at the end and make a pithy comment kind of person. And explain that. And I explained my motivations for wanting to apply, who the major influential writers were for me, and what I was trying to do with my own writing. Uh, about a year later, he was leaving to take a teaching position in Japan. And in the 90s, when you're moving out of country, it was a little bit more permanent, a little different than it is now. And he gave me a copy of the letter in case I needed it for something else. And in it, he had basically taken my email and broken it into, put it in his own words, which were much more eloquent than mine, everything that I had said about myself. So that taught me an important lesson about the importance of that communication, right? Anything you can do to make it easier for your faculty members. And so as you're, thinking about whom to ask, it's not always going to be the same three people, right? You might have a larger pool of people that could potentially write for you. And then in each context, each different award, thinking about, okay, well, who would have the most credibility for this audience, right? I had mentioned Goldwater before. That audience is going to want to see letters from tenure track faculty members, ideally associate or full professors. That's who they think is most credible. Whereas other awards like Boren or something like that are really just looking for people that have some professional standing and can give them the information they need. Relevance is important. So you might have a killer letter of recommendation from your first year writing professor, but if you're applying for a STEM award, it really doesn't matter. And vice versa. You might have a killer letter from your calculus professor, but if you're applying for a language program, it kind of doesn't matter, right? Because it doesn't say anything about your ability to study language. And then timeliness is important. Your recommendations can get stale. And so we see this in Barrett quite often, where the first year students in Barrett spend an entire 2 semester sequence with the same faculty member in most cases. Those letters are actually quite great, because that faculty member has had the opportunity to really get to know that student. But when we're still using that letter from first year, when we're applying for graduate school or applying for postgraduate fellowships in our senior year, if nothing has happened in between first and fourth year in terms of that relationship, the readers might wonder, didn't you do anything after first year? Didn't you make any relationships with other faculty members? Why are we still using this letter, right? So it's important to keep that relationship curated if you have a good one and you want to keep using it.
So you might be wondering, so what do I do in order to convince the person that I'd like to write for me that this is a worthy endeavor, that they should spend their time? doing. The first thing that you should really do is just out of professional courtesy, make sure you ask them well in advance of the deadline. 4 to 6 weeks is professional courtesy. That may not be even enough time. So maybe you want to think about, especially if there are breaks or holidays that are going to come within that time period. With faculty, we tend to disappear over those breaks and are not available and may not be working or checking email, and therefore you want to be really cognizant of the time frame and give the person enough time, especially if they're going to ask for additional information from you. Maybe they're going to want to meet with you to get a little bit more context about what you're applying for, or to update them on what you've been doing in recently. And so just make sure that you're doing this well in advance. It is a terrible idea to ask like a week before the
Mhm.
deadline. And make sure that you're finding time to reach out to us in ONSA to make sure you're asking the right kinds of people. Again, we're happy to help you to give you that guidance, but that requires you to think well in advance. Again, meeting in person is a fantastic way to really gauge, first of all, whether the person is really interested in writing that letter for you, but also giving them the information that they're going to need. And do be polite and professional in all of your correspondence. We're going to give you some tips coming up on how to approach faculty, especially because I know that some students sometimes think we're a little scary or intimidating. I do want to reassure you that the vast majority of faculty are not in this business to make a lot of money. We're here to help students, and that we are usually very, very willing to write letters of recommendation. But because we're busy, because we have a lot of other things on our plate, we do require that time, that and just that extra little bit of care that you're going to take in order to be able to write you that great letter that you want.
Absolutely. I'll tell you a secret, right? If you approach me 6 weeks ahead of time and say, "Well, I've got this, uh, you know, a scholarship I'm submitting 6 weeks from now. Would you be willing to write a letter for me?" And I agree. I'm like, "Oh, that was really great of them, ahead of time." Am I going to write that letter 6 weeks or 5 weeks or 4 weeks ahead of time? Absolutely not, right? I can assure you of that, just the way that my time management works. Um, when we get to a weekend and I get that reminder from you that, hey, the just a friendly reminder, deadline's coming up this week, I'm going to say, oh my gosh, I promised that student 6 weeks ago I would do this, and I make that a top priority. Now change that scenario to you approach me for the first time a week ahead of time. I'm not in the same mindset. I am not obliged to you at all. I'm a little ornery now because, you're asking me to rearrange my work schedule to do this, right? And so in reality, does that letter get written that far in advance? Not typically. I have some colleagues that are really good about this and get this stuff in way early. It always impresses me. But, in most cases, we need time to sort of integrate that into our work schedule, which, I'm looking out week or two at a time to think, okay, what are the projects I have to do now? Which ones can I wait on? Which ones, are coming a week or two later? So food for thought. Now, in terms of, how do we actually do this, right? Here's the wrong way to do this. Could you please write me a letter of reference? And if you think about, when you're in elementary school and you'd ask the teacher, can I go to the bathroom? And they would say, I don't know, can you? That's kind of the same thing, right? And when you ask, could you please write me a letter? Even if they don't really want to or feel like they're the best person to ask, most faculty members really, despite what it might seem like, most faculty members don't like saying no to students. So they might say, yeah, sure, because they just don't want to deal with it, right? Or they might agree. Instead, you want to engage, you want to be able to assess their enthusiastic assent here. So I think the better way to approach is to frame it more as, do you feel that you know me well enough or know my, research or my academic abilities, whatever the topic is that you want them to focus on, well enough to compose a strong letter of support for my application to blank. So you're giving them an assignment to say, I really need you to write about this specific part of me for this specific audience. And do you feel you know me well enough to write a strong letter? And that gives them an opportunity to say no. And despite what your instincts are telling you, that's a good thing. Because if they feel like they want to say no, you probably don't want them writing a letter for you because it won't be that helpful. I have had numerous occasions where I have said no to students A lot of times I get approached for medical school letters. I am not the best person to write your letter for medical school. I had somebody who took a 1 hour seminar from me 2 or 3 years prior, asked me for a letter for medical school. And I was like, I don't think this will help your application. I like you. I think you're a great student. I'm happy to write for another purpose, but not for this. For law school, on the other hand, yeah, I've written a lot of great letters for law school because I can talk about critical thinking or things like that. But I don't know if you would be a great physician. I don't know how good you are at, organic chemistry or something like that, right? So again, thinking about that relevance and giving them an opportunity to say yes or no. Really important. And I think, once I know exactly what my purpose is in this application, then I'm more willing to participate because then I don't have to like lift all the weight here. I just have to do my job.
And I would also say, like, don't take it personally if a
Right.
faculty member declines, because probably it is in your best interest. If a student asks me for something that I don't think I could write a strong letter for, I usually explain that and say, this is not me being mean. This is me trying to look out for your best interest. You really probably should get someone like X, Y, or Z that could speak to these specific things that is going to help you obtain this award. And I unfortunately am not that person. Um, I would say this though, with the medical school, now they are asking for humanities professors to write letters. And so sometimes I do get those. And even though I know nothing about organic chemistry and probably would have failed it if I had to have taken it, but at that point, I do ask those students to come and meet with me and to talk about their motivations for being a doctor and what is it that, or a medical researcher, and what is it that is shaping them as a person, because that's kind of the thing that the medical school application is
Mhm.
asking for now. They're looking for more of a holistic element. And I say, I will not be able to speak at all about your abilities in anything medical or biological. And if that is something you want, then I am definitely not the right person for this. In order to make sure that you're developing a good relationship with your recommender, which is this is what you're doing, you're cultivating a reference that's going to be a relationship. Make sure you're communicating with that person early and often. So, as Dr. Mock said, you may ask 6 weeks in advance, which is fantastic. That is professional courtesy, but that person may not have that in the top of their mind all the time. So, about 3 weeks later, maybe you want to send a very gentle reminder. 1 week before the deadline, you want to send another, again, gentle, friendly reminder. Very important for you to share your application materials. Again, the more that the person knows about the award that you are applying for, the stronger that letter is going to be. So whatever it is that you want them to highlight in reference to that specific award, do make sure you share that with them. You can obviously solicit feedback. If there's an essay you're writing for that, or a personal statement, share that with them and say, I'd love to get your feedback on this if you have the time. That also really helps them write a stronger letter, because then they see exactly what it is that you're applying for and what you want to do. Make sure you give them all the materials that they ask for as soon as they ask for them, right? Be helpful. Don't wait. If they ask for a CV or a resume, a transcript, whatever, send it to them right away. Show your gratitude, right? They are doing a service that they do not get paid for, right? They're spending extra time on. So be grateful, say thank you. And this is something I think students really kind of don't always understand. We love to know what happens after, right? So let us know. Let that person know, okay, so I submitted my application. Thank you so much for writing the letter. If then you become a semifinalist, write to them and say, hey, great news. I'm a semifinalist for this. Thanks again. I'm sure your letter was really crucial in helping me get to this point. Even if you don't get the award, then just let them know. And if you keep them in that loop, then for other opportunities that come down the road, they'll probably be more willing to write for you, because like, oh, okay, so this person didn't get this thing, but let me help them do something else great, right? And then if you get the award, please, please, please let us know.
Yeah. I still check in with mentors from 15 years ago, just on a regular basis, just to see what they're up to, showing a genuine interest in what they're doing, the research they're doing, things like that, sort of life updates. And they always seem to be genuinely interested in what's happening with my career as well, because you like to know that your labor was worth something. Too many times we get emails from faculty members say, "Hey, whatever happened to so and so?" Or "Are the Fulbright announcements out yet?" And I'm like, "Oh my gosh!" So be sure to update them as you're moving through the processes. In terms of resources, I assume you've all been to our website. If not, I don't know how you got here, but some things to pay attention to. We have a scholarship database on our website, and so you can use that to search through awards. And I think that's important to do because we have a lot of information on there besides just the search terms, but in terms of, what are their eligibility criteria, what are their selection criteria, and that's part of the strategy in thinking about, whom do I approach, whom do I ask. When you're ready to schedule advising appointments, you can do that right through our website. We do them virtually or in person, entirely up to you. And if you're not subscribed to the weekly bulletin, I suggest you do that, and that way you'll know what events are coming up. In terms of upcoming dates and deadlines, we are preparing for our big postgraduate cycles at this point. So major awards that are actually due in the fall term. Because we have the summer in between, it takes a lot of planning and time management to make sure that we stay on task. So if you're thinking about Marshall and Rhodes, and if you don't really even sure what those are, we do have information sessions coming up. First Wednesday of every month, I do a general information session on postgraduate awards. But our first deadline of concern there is April 15 for people that need to declare their intention to apply for these things, because there is a lot of labor involved. Then a campus deadline of August, right? So imagining what it would take to get a faculty member to rouse from their hibernation, from the south of France, and get a letter of recommendation on time. As well, we have the Fulbright process, which is our largest single program. If you're thinking about what to do after graduation and you're interested in Fulbright, first off, stop in at fulbright.asu.edu. That'll cover our application timeline and a general introduction. But the marquee show is March 26th, so Fulbright Day at ASU. I'm out of brand compliance there. I'm not supposed to be using the ampersand or the @ sign. Don't tell anyone about that. Communications. But Fulbright Day at ASU is our kickoff for the annual Fulbright season. It's a big information session. We'll get a panel with alumni there, time to network and kind of get you familiar with this program, which is a Department of State program that provides full funding for a year abroad to study, research, or teach. So you can see we've got a lot of milestones along the way, but our campus deadline will be on or around September 10th. We're still setting dates, but within a couple of days of September 10. The national deadline this year will be October 7, actually, found out this morning. So that gives you some sense of scale for those. So happy to open up for questions. We had one in the chat already, which I think is worth discussing. So if you have other questions, get them ready, get yourself thinking about them. But Kavoisia, I'm sure I mangled your name. I haven't said it aloud before, so I did the best I could. I appreciate any corrections. Online students face particular challenges. So, Dr. Stoff, what kind of advice have you given to online students with this? I've got mine, but I'm curious to hear, how you deal with students on this.
So yeah, this is always a tricky one, and it's also somewhat difficult, as I indicated before, for first-year students who are applying for awards and just haven't had the opportunity to develop those relationships with university faculty yet. Really, one of the best ways to start that process is to go to faculty office hours. A lot of students, again, think that this is something you only do if you're struggling in a class, or you don't do it all because it's too scary. But really, faculty often are sitting in their offices waiting for you to come. They love interacting and talking with students and getting to know them. This is especially true with online classes, because you don't have the same kind of classroom interactions, and you don't get to have that kind of interpersonal connection made. And it's not because faculty don't want that. They absolutely do want that. You can pop in for office hours or make an appointment to go and see a professor to talk about anything, right? Maybe there was a reading that you were particularly interested in, and you'd love to just discuss further, or you want suggestions for similar kinds of things, or you're interested in learning more about the research that the faculty member does. Faculty love talking about their own research. It's a really great way to kind of pump up their ego, but also to get them interested in you. And then you can talk about the things that you're wanting to pursue. This is a wonderful way for you to start establishing those relationships. And that could be in a class of, 15 or 1500. It really doesn't matter. The faculty are there, and they're willing to talk to you. They're waiting for you to talk to you. Most of the time, students don't come to office hours unless they need help on a specific assignment. And this is a little bit disappointing, right? We want to see that intellectual curiosity. We want to see that side of you that's more personal. So absolutely take advantage of those.
Yeah, and the other component to that too, I would think, is being strategic about course selection. It is easy to make your course selection based on what's convenient, as opposed to what is actually better for you in the long run. But I do understand, right? Bio 101, I'm going to take it async and crank it out on a weekend, fine. But other courses, particularly courses in your major, and it's particularly if you're a Barrett student, if you're an online Barrett student, a certain number of your credits need to be, honors credits. So honors contracts are a great way to get to know faculty members better. Obviously, the dedicated honors courses, looking for synchronous courses, looking for courses where there is discussion component, looking for courses where there is a tenured faculty member teaching them, and trying to engage as much as possible. We have increasing numbers of research opportunities in all majors for online students as well. It's been a high priority for the university to make sure that we're not just offering classes, but we're actually offering a full and well-developed university experience. One of our nominees for the Marshall Scholarship was an online student cycle before last. She was the first student body president for the online campus, which is a position she had advocated for. So there are deans of students for our online students, and we, unlike so many other universities where we do actually treat it as another campus as opposed to just an ancillary part of the university, right? So, but it does require initiative from you. But yeah, both, taking that initiative to reach out and thinking about, strategically. Um, yeah, Simi asked a good question about, again, thinking about relevance. What is the audience looking for here? If I'm applying to an engineering internship, the letter from my human event professor might not be that relevant. If I'm applying for a more general internship, or maybe I could work with my human event professor to talk about my professionalism, right? Or my maturity. It really just depends on what the demands of that application are. If they're very clearly want to hear some documentation of your technical abilities, that letter might not, because, I couldn't talk about whether or not you know how to do Python. As far as I know, that's a snake, right? So just thinking about, what is it, that information that they need, from those letters. Angelica asks, what would you recommend for faculty who do not have open hours or rather schedule according to need? Would applying this be suggested to the faculty member to schedule a casual chat on course topics? Yeah, absolutely. I was really interested in the reading we did last week, and I'm considering exploring it as a topic for my term paper. Could we schedule a time to talk? Great. So much better than I'd like to ask you about my last test score. Great. In last call for any other questions, all good questions. And whenever in doubt, if you're not really sure how to proceed, talk to us. We're happy to coach you through it. This is actually, if you think about people who come to university without, their entire family having gone to college, or if you don't have a lot of friends that went to college or anything like that, it's actually part of what we call the hidden curriculum. It's not one of the things we teach, in a lot of cases, which is why we try to provide these types of seminars of how to negotiate kind of a weird situation. And we know there have been studies. A friend of mine actually did a study. He was a communications professor, that undergraduate students, given the option, would rather approach a member of the opposite sex and ask them out on a date cold than they would rather go to posted office hours for their faculty member. They find that one more anxiety provoking than asking out a stranger on a date, which I think is funny. So, because they're sitting there waiting for you, right? They want to talk to you, so take advantage of that. Well, good. Dr. Stoff, any other closing thoughts?
Yeah, I would just really reiterate that regardless of how scary you think your professor is, the chances are that they would be overjoyed to see you in office hours are very high.
Hmm.
We are required to have office hours, and sitting around with, no one coming is not the most fun thing in the world. And again, we are most of us in this profession because we really enjoy teaching, we really enjoy interacting with students, and we enjoy mentoring. Like mentoring is actually a key component of that. And writing letters of recommendation comes under that purview of mentorship. And we absolutely love it when we see our students succeed and receive these awards. And so helping you to do that, it is often a joy.
Hmm.
But in order for us to do that best, we have to get to know you a little bit better. So that's kind of part of it.
Yeah,
And I'd really just, encourage you, don't be scared, right? Be brave.
yeah, absolutely. Angelica asked a great question to round us out as well. Is what would you want to see from an online student that would make them stand out in class, particularly online classes that routinely have hundreds of students? And again, it's going to depend on the format of the class. If this is just sort of a here, watch this video and then take this quiz kind of class, there's probably not much you can do, right? If there's no discussion. But, thinking about, I've taught several online classes myself. Um, Inquisitiveness, I think, is one thing that always stands out to me, that students who ask questions about what we're doing and why, ask questions about the test, uh, work to make the class a better experience for other people. That's big for me in terms of, students in my classes who work to shape community. I actually give extra credit. I don't call it extra credit, but I award higher grades to students in my classes who make the class a better experience for other people, not just who do extra work for themselves, right? So people who ask really good questions in online discussion classes, people who are seem like they're helping other students, students go out of their way to form study groups, just anything like that stands out to me. But yeah, it's a really good question. Like, how do you stand out from the crowd? And again, part of it is trying to avoid being in a crowd if you can. So, oh, nice. I didn't even know we had that. Well, great. Well, thank you all very much, Dr. Stuff. Thank you as always for your insight and wisdom. Hopefully, if you enjoyed this kind of information, we'll be doing this the next 3 Fridays. Our next session will be a two-parter, and we'll be jumping into storytelling strategies within the context of personal statement writing. So personal statement writing, again, can't get around that for all fellowships. I can only think of one fellowship out there that doesn't require some version of a personal statement. And so we'll get into strategies for that. And then the second part of that, we'll actually turn the tables and allow you to pretend that you are a fellowship's reader. And so you can experience what it's like to read and evaluate some of these applications. And then our final session will be focused on interview strategies, which obviously has a ton of application outside of the fellowships world. So great. Well, have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you so much.